The mansion exploded with laughter at the cleaning lady, Victoria. But her posture was unbreakable, her gaze steady. It wasn't the look of a servant, but a soldier. The host, her own brother, had no idea who he'd just provoked. In the gilded heart of Beverly Hills, the Sterling Mansion was a monument to new money and old sins. On the night of the annual Patrons of the Arts charity gala, it glittered with malicious energy. The source of this energy, a cruel, shared joke, was about to walk through the door. Victoria Temps Blackwood, aged 42, knew she was the punchline. For 2 years, she had been the invisible force that made this palace gleam, the cleaning lady who knew every secret smudge and hidden dust bunny. She was a ghost in a blue-collar uniform, a silent witness to the performative kindness and genuine cruelty of California's elite. Tonight, she was to be the evening's entertainment. The invitation had arrived 3 days prior, not by mail, but hand-delivered by the mansion's owner himself, Richard Blackwood. He'd found her polishing the grand foyer's marble floor, his shadow falling over her like a bad omen. "A little something for you, Victoria," he'd said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. The envelope was thick, embossed in gold. Charity Gala. Saturday. Dress code is, well, maximum elegance. He leaned in, his smile a predatory slash. "I'm sure you have a closet full of suitable options." His friends, lounging nearby, had erupted in sycophantic laughter. It was a trap, as subtle as a guillotine. A public execution of her dignity. Richard intended to parade his humble cleaning lady in front of his billionaire friends, a living, breathing spectacle of social disparity. He'd even tipped off a few society bloggers, promising them an educational moment. The night before, as Victoria was emptying the trash in his home office, she overheard him on the phone with his wife, Helena. "The bet is on, darling. $100,000 says she doesn't have the nerve to show up. And if she does," he chuckled, "she'll be the highlight of the party. The jester in our court." Helena's tinkling laughter followed. "You're wicked, Richard. The poor thing will probably rent some ghastly polyester thing, feel utterly humiliated, and flee in tears within 15 minutes. It's almost too cruel." Almost, Richard had agreed. But Richard Blackwood, for all his inherited wealth and cunning, was a poor intelligence analyst. He knew nothing of the woman who scrubbed his floors. He didn't know that Victoria's quiet demeanor wasn't meekness, but discipline. He didn't know her methodical cleaning patterns were, in fact, reconnaissance. And he certainly didn't know that before she ever picked up a mop, Sergeant Victoria Temps of the U.S. Army Intelligence Corps had spent a decade hunting far more dangerous men than him in places that would make Beverly Hills feel like a fantasy. She had traded her uniform for a cleaner's smock only after tragedy struck. After their father, Henry Blackwood, died under mysterious circumstances. After Richard, her half-brother, had used his legal power to sever her from the family will, cut off her mother's support, and cast them into poverty. Victoria's mother had withered away from a broken heart and a lack of proper care, and Victoria was left with nothing but a burning, cold resolve. So she'd gotten a job in the last place on earth she ever wanted to be. Not for the paycheck, but for proximity. For access. For 2 years, she hadn't just been cleaning. She'd been mapping the house, studying its security systems, learning its routines, and gathering intelligence with the patience of a sniper. The invitation wasn't a trap for her, it was an extraction point. It was the final phase of a meticulously planned operation. As she looked at the golden invitation in her small, Spartan apartment, a flicker of something hard and ancient passed through her eyes. It was the look of a commander giving the final nod before a mission commenced. She accepted the invitation not to attend a party, but to go to war. Richard wanted a jester for his court. He was about to get a judge, jury, and executioner. The moment Victoria stepped across the threshold of the ballroom, a wave of whispers and stifled giggles rippled through the crowd. It was precisely as she had anticipated. She wore a simple, vintage black gown. It was decades old, belonging to her mother from a time before their world had crumbled. It was immaculately clean, perfectly pressed, and in its understated dignity, it was a silent rebuke to the sequined, peacocking vulgarity that filled the room. But it wasn't the dress that caused the momentary, confused pause in the mockery. It was the way she wore it. Victoria walked not with the hesitant, apologetic shuffle of an intruder, but with the measured, deliberate gait of someone who owned the ground beneath her feet. Her shoulders were back, her spine ramrod straight, her chin held at a precise, neutral angle. She moved through the sea of hostile faces as if she were reviewing troops, her gaze sweeping the room, calmly cataloging every sneer, every pointed finger. It was the unbreakable posture of a soldier, and it was profoundly, unnervingly out of place. "My God, she actually came," hissed Patricia Weston, a senator's wife whose face was a mask of cruel delight, to her friend. "And look at what she's wearing," replied Vivian Chambers, an oil heiress, her voice loud enough to carry. "Did she pull that out of a time capsule? How utterly pathetic." Victoria's training kicked in, a silent, internal checklist. Identify primary threat, Richard Blackwood, center of the room. Identify secondary hostiles, Patricia Weston, Vivian Chambers, and the surrounding clique. Maintain operational silence. Observe and orient. In her mind, their petty cruelty was nothing more than battlefield noise, the distracting chatter of undisciplined hostiles. It was an environment she was trained to dominate, not to fear. Richard, flanked by his inner circle, finally pushed his way through the crowd to confront her, his chest puffed with the arrogance of a man who believed he was in total control. His victory seemed assured. "Victoria," he boomed, a theatrical grin plastered on his face. "What a delightful surprise. I knew you'd come. After all, it's not every day a person like you gets an invitation to an event like this." "A person like me?" Victoria repeated. Her voice was quiet, yet it sliced through the nearby chatter with the clean efficiency of a honed blade. For the first time that night, the laughter around them faltered. There was a resonance in her tone, a lack of fear or deference, that didn't compute. Richard hesitated for a microsecond, a flicker of unease in his eyes before his arrogance reasserted itself. "Well, you know. Someone, from your circumstances. Someone who doesn't normally frequent this kind of environment. You must be feeling a little overwhelmed." A slow, serene smile touched Victoria's lips. It wasn't the nervous smile of a cornered animal. It was something else entirely, something that made a few guests instinctively take a step back. "Overwhelmed," she repeated softly, her eyes locking onto his. "No, Richard. I'm feeling exactly where I've always belonged." The statement hung in the air, charged with a meaning no one but she could fully grasp. It spoke not only of the blood right that connected her to the name Blackwood but of the warrior's spirit that placed her comfortably in the center of any conflict. The silence was deafening. The atmosphere of the party had fundamentally shifted. The hunter was beginning to suspect he might be the prey. Richard cleared his throat, trying to wrestle back control. "Well, I hope you enjoy the evening. I'm sure it will be educational." "Oh, I have no doubt," Victoria replied, her gaze slowly moving past him, sweeping over the faces of his friends as if memorizing them for a future report. "It's going to be educational for all of us." Richard, feeling his perfectly orchestrated humiliation slipping from his grasp, decided to escalate. He grabbed a silver spoon and tapped it sharply against a champagne flute, the piercing ring silencing the ballroom. Every eye turned to him. This was his stage, and he would not be upstaged. "Everyone, your attention, please," he announced, his voice oozing with false magnanimity. "Tonight, we have a very special guest. Someone who truly understands the meaning of hard work. Please, let's give a warm welcome to our dedicated cleaning lady, Victoria." The dam of feigned politeness broke. A roar of cruel, unrestrained laughter swept through the hall. Cell phone flashes strobed like paparazzi, capturing Victoria's solitary figure for 1,000 sarcastic social media posts. Helena tugged at her husband's arm, feigning concern. "Richard, darling, don't you think this is a bit much? Nonsense, he laughed. I'm giving her the story of a lifetime. This is philanthropy, my dear. Victoria stood motionless in the center of the storm. They expected to see her flinch, to see tears of shame well in her eyes. Instead, they saw that same unnerving calm, a serenity that seemed forged in pressures they couldn't possibly imagine. Patricia Weston, emboldened by Richard's display, sauntered over with her friends. Victoria, dear, she cooed, her smile pure venom. That dress. Tell me, where did your mother get a piece like that? A high-end thrift store, perhaps? Actually, Victoria said, her voice even and clear, this dress has a very specific history. My mother wore it the last time she was in a ballroom just like this one. That was over 20 years ago. She paused, letting the silence build before delivering the first volley. Back when she was still Victoria Temps Blackwood. The name hit the room like a shockwave. Blackwood. The laughter died instantly. People turned to each other, confused whispers replacing the open mockery. Richard, who had been basking in his triumph, spun around slowly, his face a mask of disbelief. What did you just say? Temps Blackwood, Victoria repeated, her voice now carrying a sharp, undeniable authority. It's funny, isn't it? The parts of our own family history we choose to conveniently forget. Richard's face began to lose its color. A pasty white crept up his neck. You're delusional, he stammered, his voice losing its confident baritone. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but... This isn't a game, Richard. It's history. Our history. She took a single, deliberate step toward him, and several guests instinctively recoiled. The history you tried to bury when you decided my mother and I were inconvenient loose ends after our father died. The whispers grew into a frantic buzz. What is she talking about? Helena demanded, grabbing Richard's arm, her painted-on smile gone. She's lying. Richard insisted, but a fine tremor had started in his hands. She's a disturbed employee trying to get money. Lying? Victoria reached into her simple clutch purse. But she didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a piece of history. It was a ring, an antique platinum setting that held a magnificent, cornflower blue sapphire. Even from across the room, the old money guests recognized the iconic design. It was the Blackwood family engagement ring, passed down for generations. This ring, Victoria said, holding it up for all to see, was given to my mother, Isabella Temps, by her father. Henry Blackwood. My grandfather. She fixed her gaze on Richard. The man you told everyone died without any other children. Richard stared at the ring as if it were a ghost. Where did you get that? How dare you steal? A short, humorless laugh escaped Victoria's lips. You can't steal what is yours by birthright, Richard. Though that seems to be a concept you've struggled with. Patricia Weston, her jaw slack, whispered to Vivian, good heavens, do you think it's true? Is she his cousin? Victoria overheard the whisper and turned her cool gaze upon them. Cousin? No, dear. She paused, letting the drama build to its peak before looking directly at a now ashen Richard. I'm his sister. The room exploded. Not in laughter, but in a chaotic symphony of gasps, frantic murmurs, and the furious clicking of phone cameras now documenting a scandal of epic proportions. Richard looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. This is ridiculous, he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. My father would never. You're inventing this whole sordid fantasy. My mother, Isabella, was your family's piano teacher for 5 years, Victoria continued, her voice relentless, cutting through his denials. An affair began. When she discovered she was pregnant with me, your father, our father, promised to provide for us. And he did. He kept his word, secretly but honorably, right up until the day he died. Helena had a hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes darting between her husband and this impossibly composed woman, watching the architecture of her life crumble in slow motion. "You," Victoria said, pointing a steady finger at Richard, "decided that his honor was your inconvenience. The moment he was gone, you cut off the allowance. You sold the house he'd bought for my mother and left us with nothing. You buried us." "I had no obligation," Richard began, trying to find legal footing. "No obligation to your own blood? To your father's other child?" Victoria interrupted, her voice laced with ice. "An interesting philosophy, considering you inherited 100% of a fortune that, by all moral rights, should have been divided." The weight of her words, the sheer gravity of the accusation, began to sink in. Guests who had been laughing at her minutes before now subtly edged away from Richard, creating a physical perimeter of condemnation. He was no longer the charming host, he was a pariah in his own home. "Prove it," Richard said, a last, desperate gambit. "Anyone can spin a story. Anyone can find an old ring." Victoria's serene smile returned, but this time it held the chilling confidence of a grandmaster revealing his checkmate. "Oh, Richard. Did you really think I came here unprepared?" She took out her phone and made a quiet, discreet gesture toward the ballroom entrance. "They can come in now." As if on cue, the grand doors opened. 3 figures entered, and their presence instantly transformed the society gala into a court of law. The first was Diane Morrison, a Pulitzer-nominated investigative journalist known for dismantling the careers of corrupt and powerful men. Her face was grim, her eyes sharp. The second was a tall, sharp-featured man named David Chun. He carried a heavy leather briefcase and moved with an air of unshakable purpose. Victoria knew him well. He was a former top lawyer from the Army's Judge Advocate General's, JAG, Corps, a man who believed in justice with the fervor of a zealot. Their eyes met across the room in a brief, almost imperceptible nod, a shared acknowledgement between 2 veterans on a mission. The third figure made Richard Blackwood physically stagger, a choked gasp escaping his lips. "Dr. Hamilton?" Helena whispered, recognizing the elderly, stooped man who had been the Blackwood family's private physician for 40 years. "What are you doing here?" Dr. Hamilton ignored her. He walked shakily to the center of the room, his hands trembling, but his voice, when he spoke, was surprisingly steady. He looked at the sea of shocked faces, then directly at Richard. 22 years ago, he began, his voice amplified by the sudden, tomb-like silence, "I was coerced into signing a falsified death certificate." He took a deep, shuddering breath. Henry Blackwood did not die of a heart attack. He was slowly, methodically poisoned with arsenic over a period of several months. A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air from the room. The scandal had metastasized from family drama into something infinitely darker. Diane Morrison, the journalist, raised a hand. "Please, keep your cameras rolling. This is an official confession, and we are recording for legal purposes." Richard, now sweating profusely, his expensive tuxedo suddenly looking like a costume on a cornered animal, turned on the doctor. "You're insane, Hamilton. My father had a weak heart. Everyone knew it. Your father," Dr. Hamilton continued, his voice gaining strength from a conscience finally unburdened, "discovered you had been embezzling millions from the company. He had already contacted his lawyer to change his will, to formally include Victoria and her mother. He was going to report you to the authorities. And then, he began to get sick." Victoria stood by, silent tears of vindication tracing paths down her cheeks. 22 years of being called a liar, of carrying this toxic truth alone. Finally, it was out in the light. David Chun, the JAG lawyer, stepped forward and opened his briefcase, his movements precise and economical. "When we had Mr. Blackwood's body exhumed last month under a court order, the tissue samples we collected told a very different story." He placed a certified lab report on a nearby table. "The arsenic levels were not just present, they were fatal. It's a conspiracy." Richard shrieked, his voice thin and reedy. "They're all in on it. She's paying them to ruin me. This was the moment Victoria had been waiting for. The moment to show them she wasn't just a victim who had gotten lucky. She was the architect of his downfall. She stepped forward, her voice calm and authoritative, taking control of the presentation. "Richard, you seem to believe this all happened by magic," she said, connecting her phone to the mansion's state-of-the-art sound system with a simple adapter. "You've forgotten my background. Before I was a cleaner, I was Sergeant Temps, U.S. Army Intelligence." A new wave of confusion rippled through the guests. A soldier? This woman? For 2 years, Victoria explained, as the first piece of evidence flashed onto the giant projection screen above the fireplace, "I wasn't just dust in your office. I was using my skills. When you were out, I took less than 5 minutes to clone your hard drive with a portable imager." An image of Richard's accounting ledgers appeared, with highlighted entries showing embezzlement. "I recovered financial records you thought you'd deleted forever. I traced your network of offshore accounts used for money laundering. It's amazing what you can find when you know where, and how, to look." She swiped on her phone, and a new file appeared on the screen, a series of threatening emails. "These were sent from you to Dr. Hamilton. You threatened to expose a past medical malpractice suit to ruin him if he ever spoke about your father's symptoms. I recovered these from a server you wiped in 2004. You were sloppy." Finally, she cued the audio file. "The master stroke. And this," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "is from a burner phone you threw in a lake 22 years ago. A friend of mine in a specialized field owed me a favor. It took 6 months, but they recovered the data." Richard's own voice, younger but unmistakable, filled his own ballroom, dripping with cold fury. "Hamilton, you keep your goddamn mouth shut about anything you found in the old man's blood. Not a word. And as for that piano teacher and her bastard daughter, they're on their own. They get nothing. Do you understand me?" The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and damning. It was the sound of a life ending. Helena stared at her husband, her face a mask of pure revulsion. Even his most ardent defenders now looked at him as if he were a monster. He had not only stolen an inheritance. He had murdered his own father for it. Victoria, the intelligence analyst, had completed her mission. The target was neutralized. The next 2 hours saw Richard Blackwood's empire dismantled in real time. As he sat slumped in an armchair, a hollowed-out man, David Chun served him with papers for a $50 million wrongful death suit. Police officers, grim-faced and efficient, entered and led him away in handcuffs, his journey passing through the same foyer where he had tried to humiliate his sister just hours before. The flashbulbs of the reporters gathered outside illuminated his face, not in glory, but in permanent disgrace. 6 months later, the name Blackwood still dominated headlines, but for entirely different reasons. Richard was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His assets were seized, his reputation incinerated. Victoria Temps Blackwood now sat in Richard's former office. The ostentatious hunting trophies were gone, replaced by framed photos of smiling employees and certificates of corporate social responsibility. She had inherited her rightful half of the company and, with the board's unanimous support, had been named its new CEO. She ran the Blackwood Corporation not like a fiefdom, but like a well-led military unit. Her principles were simple and direct: mission, integrity, and welfare of the troops. She promoted the former head of cleaning, a sharp and capable woman named Amanda, to be her executive assistant. She instituted fair wages, profit sharing, and a promotion system based entirely on merit, not politics. Productivity and profits skyrocketed by 40%, fueled by a loyalty Richard's fear-based tactics could never inspire. Her first major corporate initiative was the creation of the Second Chance Fund, a foundation dedicated to providing employment, training, and startup capital for military veterans facing hardship after their service. It was her new mission, transforming her personal quest for justice into a sustainable system of support for her fellow soldiers. Helena had divorced Richard immediately and moved with the children to another state. Before leaving, she met with Victoria. "You could have destroyed us all," she'd said, her voice filled with a quiet awe. "But you protected my children from the fallout. I'll never forget that." "A soldier's duty is to protect the innocent," Victoria had replied simply. "The children are innocent." During an interview for a Forbes cover story, the journalist asked the inevitable question. "Some have called your takedown of Richard a brutal act of revenge. What do you say to that?" Victoria looked out the window at the company campus, where employees of all levels were treated with a dignity that was once a foreign concept. "Revenge would have been to let him rot in a prison of his own guilt, unknown to the world," she replied calmly. "Justice is holding an individual accountable to a standard, ensuring the system is corrected, and preventing future harm. What I did was justice. It was a tactical operation with a clear, moral objective." "And your advice for others facing injustice?" Victoria smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "Conduct your reconnaissance. Gather your intelligence. Choose your battlefield. And never, ever underestimate the person your enemy overlooks." That evening, Victoria returned not to a cramped apartment, but to a comfortable home. In her living room, 2 adopted children, who, like her, had been dealt a bad hand by life, were doing their homework. She thought of her father, the man she barely knew but whose blood and honor ran in her veins. She had not only reclaimed his name but had transformed his legacy. The real victory wasn't in Richard's downfall. It was in proving that power built on integrity is the only kind that lasts. He had tried to humiliate a cleaning lady, only to discover she was a soldier, a strategist, and the commander of her own fate. If this story of justice and resilience moved you, show your gratitude for all who serve, in and out of uniform. Please leave respect in the comments, share this story, and subscribe for more proof that true strength is found where you least expect it.